Afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Tiffany. I'm the global technology lead for IoT. We have our Azure IoT business. And so if anybody came to my session this morning, kind of took you from Windows Core IoT all the way out to through our Azure stack, all the way out to outputs and stuff like that. So got to feel the love with the New Zealand internet. It was good. It's my fault for having, all my data center stuff in Quincy, Washington, instead of somewhere closer. It's all good. So this session is a little strange and different. A lot of my life, I do a lot of mobile strategy stuff. I talk to executives lots of times every week. And I've just been in the mobile space for so long and built so many big systems and kind of helped people do strategy from end to end. And I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 months ago, I don't know how long it was, does anybody know what a Twitter storm is? Like, have you ever seen like Mark Andreessen or Steve Sinofsky or something like that do a little Twitter storm where you got a whole lot to say and maybe just go toot, 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 So anyway, I did something like that on strategy, and it kind of worked out. And I started, more and more CEOs and CIOs kind of like this because it's just a nice little checklist of building blocks of things to do. Nothing esoteric. So anyway, this talk is typically, kind of aimed at decision makers in a company who need to make big changes. They need to make big sweeping changes, and they want to mobilize their enterprise. And so if you think of yourself in here, are you that kind of decision maker, or do you work with those folks in your company, or are you a consultant that you work with customers and you need to help them mobilize their enterprise? Anyway, there's no demos. It's just kind of high-level concepts. It's just a real simple checklist. And unlike a good presentation, which is all pictures, these are all going to be tweets. So I hope that works for you. I just want to make sure we set expectations that you're just going to get a bunch of tweets. And I'm going to give you color commentary about each one. And there's a lot of them. So hopefully we'll make it through all of them by the end. We might come crash landing into at the end of the time, but that's fine. There's a bunch of them. So anyway, let's get after it here. And I've kind of broken it into 3 sections. And I know that this clicker is going to work. Silly me. All right, we're not going to use the clicker. We'll hit the space bar. Excellent. Okay, so I've broken this into kind of 3 sections. The first section is about app migration, which, when I talk to executives about their mobile strategy, a lot of times this is not the part that gets the most love. They're talking about all kinds of new things, greenfield things, or management and stuff like that. But there's this big elephant in the room, and it has to do with all these apps that are out there that need to get migrated to mobile. So let's start off with our first tweet. What you may not know is there's roughly, 2.7 or more million Win32 apps out there that run global business today. And most of these were written in the 90s, with some of your favorite old programming languages. A lot of mine. I'll talk about some of them. Some of this will just kind of be fun and silly, and some will be kind of serious. But it's a big deal. If all business is being run on that, and you wonder why did you see things in the news like why did Apple and IBM get together? Tim Cook's looking back at his app store on Apple and seeing more than 1 million apps, but he scratched his head because they're all consumer apps. None of the giant vertical solutions that actually run global business were in there. Now, obviously, he wasn't going to call us up and say, "Hey, could you help us out with apps for the iPad?" So went with IBM, and that's kind of why things like that are happening. But the reality is all these apps are still running on the desktop. And they're running on XP and Windows 7, and they can run on our modern desktop as well, 8, 8.1, and 10. But there's some good reasons to migrate those, but it's been really hard to get a lot of businesses to do that. And there's a lot of reasons for it. But there's some good reasons to do it. So when I talk to some of these folks, they kind of sit around and go, well, a lot of it is around budget. I don't have the budget to migrate all these apps. I'm just going to put a Band-Aid on this existing code base, and that's going to be cheaper or better than doing a rewrite. There's some real problems with that. part of it, when you talk to your customer or to your boss, or if you're a CIO or a decision maker in this room, about how do you move off of that problem, where the idea of doing nothing is better than spending a lot of money to do something. Because trust me, if you're like me, you probably were involved in lots of mega projects in the 1990s, where just, it was routine for lots of big companies that I did business with to have hundreds, some even had thousands of internal applications they built. One of the biggest problems is security. Most analysts will come out and tell you, IDC and Gartner, when you look at all these hack attacks we're having on a weekly basis, over 95% of those is because of out-of-date software, unpatched software, old software. All these apps, these millions of apps that are running global business were built, a lot of them before the internet was widely commercially, broadly used. And so a lot of the security things, the ideas, the security lifecycle, the way they were built predated those concerns. And so they're still out there. Some people are virtualizing old things. I've seen companies, I saw one company that had some OS2 apps that they needed to keep running for logistics. And obviously they couldn't get support from IBM anymore. And so ironically, the only way they could support it was, you remember we had a product called Virtual PC a long time ago? Anyway, it was XP running Virtual PC, running OS2, running their whatever app to keep things going. And it kind of clarifies for you the links that people will go to keep old stuff running rather than rewriting. But there's big security problems around, and a lot of people say, well, what do I do? And you kind of say, well, maybe go through and do an inventory in your company, come up with a checklist of all the hundreds of apps that you've got, start interviewing employees, find out who's using what, start pulling the plug on things, and start migration there. No one said it's easy, but with some of these big hack attacks that you've seen, it's no longer good enough. You've seen, CEOs of major companies go, well, that whole IT thing, that's really not my thing. I'm not really connected to them, So when they lost millions of credit card numbers and all that, they've kind of distanced themselves. And then what have we seen? CEOs are getting fired. And they can no longer, because we're all in it now. All these businesses are digital businesses, the way we're doing things. And so it's getting serious. So you got to do it. You got to do it. So I'm going to walk through just different elements of this, and then some I'll go through really fast and other ones. Who remembers all these little acronyms and things like this? Remember in the 90s? Remember Corba and all that fun stuff, and DCOM? I remember us trying to build our own little supercomputers, with Windows NT and DCOM and having a bunch of machines all work processes together. Those things are all still out there. RMIA was in Java. Obviously Corba was a big deal, the object group. Anyway, move all that stuff to REST APIs primarily. That's what we're doing today. I know at the beginning of the 2000s, we had this whole SOAP XML revolution, and everybody was going to build SOA architectures and all that. And it really didn't happen. A lot of people talk to a good game. A lot of architects were talking to a good game. But when I go around and talk to customers around the world, almost none of them really did it. But they're doing it now. It's grassroots. REST took over, right? In spite of all the big consortiums that were working on different things for SOAP. Get them to move off of that. Do any of you remember all these fun programming languages and tools? Does that bring back good memories? I probably left out a bunch because it wouldn't fit in a tweet. God, what did I leave out? Did anybody ever use like Gupta SQL Windows? Or man, there were some fun ones back then. I'm one of those people who really just got going because Visual Basic 3 was just so easy to use. It was like I was painting. I had to learn how to code later. The big thing here is that, and people would kick sand in my face for being a VB developer. VB, though, lots of people say, why did Microsoft win in the enterprise in the 90s? And they talk about, well, Windows was so successful or all these other things. But, things like VB and Access, remember how IT used to complain about Access databases permeating all of IT, like tentacles? It kind of helped us win, too. It's kind of like iTunes today. Kind of has its tentacles in people, and switching costs to go to another platform are high because your music's over here. Anyway, same kind of thing. But back to the whole security deal. These are all running on old school Windows, kind of flat, wide open, modern Windows, modern everything, iOS, stuff like that. They're all based on sandboxes. Apps can't see each other, they can't communicate, they can't elevate their privileges. There are certain things they can do. And And so those are big reasons around the security space of why you need to move all those Win32 into a sandbox environment, like you have with Windows, modern Windows today. Here's a big thing I noticed, and you probably noticed, back in the good old days, people built giant applications. So when you think about all those millions of vertical applications, they're big for a reason. They might be running a nuclear power plant, or pipelines, or refineries, or giant things, giant telematics systems, and running fleets of trucks and stuff like that. They weren't the simple 1 or 2 screen apps that you might get on your phone. The problem is that people were building these big giant apps, and we had a wrong mindset. We didn't think about user experience at all. In fact, everybody was kind of going for the NASA mission control way of thinking. We're going to buy bigger monitors for our employees so that we can fit everything on one screen. And you'd see all these aspects to a giant app that might have 400 screens that had nothing in common with each other, but we would cram them all in there together. And then you wonder why we had to build training documents, like hundreds of pages, and put them in little spiral binders and give them to employees to train them on how to use all these apps. They were just too hard to use. They were too complex. So it's when you think about how we've changed, and when you think of all the best mobile apps you can think of, they're very simple. They're very just focused on simple tasks, a single purpose, not an app with 400 screens that runs on a phone. I know that sounds crazy. I actually was involved in building one of those for a giant bottling company back in 2005. I guess we hadn't learned yet. We got it to work, but anyway, that's how you're going to need to break. So when I spend time with folks at Gartner, people will be surprised when they say, well, you know what? You're not going to have a one-to-one migration for the 2.7 million Win32 apps out there to 2.7 million mobile apps. It's actually going to be 10x up to 100x more of all that, because you're going to take all those giant monolithic apps and you're going to break them up into little pieces that are simple to use, that are understandable, that don't need those giant binders to train people to use. So all those client-server apps out there, the only connection they had to some other part of the world was that client-server connection to a database. And they don't take advantage of any of the sensors, things that make phones and apps on phones so personal, so contextually relevant. Being able to know your location, being able to connect to the world, being able to have an accelerometer. Think of all the stuff that's really kind of getting excited. I spend a lot of my time on IoT these days. All the things that are exciting about IoT, well, all those sensors are all built in smartphones. All those processors, all those things that are making IoT really hit today is all pioneered in smartphones. And so that's the difference. A lot of people, when I see them try to port desktop apps to mobile, they just kind of do a straight port, and they don't try to take advantage of what they have on a mobile device to increase the personal and the richness, the connection that you can have with a user. So definitely think about stuff like that. All right. Remember doing inter-process communication, like name pipes or mail slots or anything fun like that, or maybe just TCP connections between multiple apps on a platform. Saw lots of people do that. I was involved in that. So I used to work in our mobile embedded division a long time ago when it was called that, back in the Pocket PC, CE, Windows Mobile days. And we built lots of apps, lots of industrial apps for those rugged devices, barcode scanners and stuff like that. But we had limitations. Each app couldn't have more than 32 meg of RAM, and you couldn't have more than 32 apps. And it seemed crazy at the time. And so we'd build multiple EXEs and have IPC talking to each other. And I see people doing that on desktops. They're all over the place. It's just not secure, and it doesn't work in a sandbox environment. Today, and it's not just Windows, you see this on other platforms, the notion of using contracts. Whenever apps need to share data with each other on a platform, they need to do it securely and not the Wild West free-for-all that we used to do when we were just trying to get around problems and we weren't really thinking about security. So these are things you need to look at. I distinctly remember when we launched Windows 8 and I had customers say, I don't know if that model's going to work. It's going to break our apps because we have apps that have like 6 EXEs all talking to each other through crazy protocols and stuff like that, and you want us to have them all sandboxed. I'm like, yeah, security. It takes some time to get it, but there's a way. Okay, all these favorite desktop databases, again, I'm probably leaving off a few, a lot, maybe like Clipper or fun stuff like that. I think I got started with DBase 3 when I started doing databases. Like I said earlier, Access databases just took over the world. They were everywhere, and IT hated it. I loved it. It's a good thing. And people put VB apps on there, and it was great. Windows 3.1 and Access 2.0 and VB3. It's just a match made in heaven. You know, you put your little database out there on your NetWare share. Anyway, today, I mean, there is still a real reason. I know we kind of moved to a client server and then in tier and then cloud and all this stuff. But in the mobile world, there's still an absolutely great reason to have local databases, kind of like these desktop databases a long time ago. And it's because we don't have ubiquitous wireless connectivity yet. We're trying to get there, but we're just not there yet. And so you need to cache data offline. You need to have it as part of a good user experience. People all the time mistake UX for UI. There's overlap, but UX is the whole experience. And so having that local database and following different patterns so that that mobile device and that mobile app is responsive all the time is a great thing. You know, that's why the mobile web wasn't a big hit in the earlier days, you know, not even, you know, even recently on mobile devices, because you couldn't count on the web pages always coming to you. You know, obviously things are getting better. But yeah, so SQLite runs everywhere. We have SQLite running on Windows Phone. Obviously, it's baked into iOS, Android, and we've certainly taken dependencies on it at Microsoft. If you use our Azure App Services, particularly the mobile services, we built a sync technology that'll sync SQLite on any platform with our backend databases in Azure. So go take a look at it. Remember ODBC, ADO, NetListener on Oracle, stuff like that? I'm not going to dwell on this. It's kind of the same thing. Get rid of all that stuff and just go to RESTful APIs, you know. Get rid of that tight coupling with those old proprietary kind of connections to client-server databases. Again, sometimes you'll think I'm doing crazy talk because you'll say, nobody still has that. But if you get on a plane like I do and meet customers all over the world, you find out really fast that they're all still, so many of them are still living in the 90s. And it's a real thing, and it's everywhere. So this part here about tiny controls and stuff like that, this kind of goes along the lines with the apps that were kind of for NASA mission control, where you crammed everything on a big screen and just bought people bigger monitors with the big tubes, you know. You've got to get away from that. So as you go to apps that have a single focus, and within the apps themselves, the screens, you know, they need to have simple, you know, each screen should just be about one idea, one focus. And so long before you started hearing people talk about mobile first or cloud first, a bunch of us, we used to talk about touch first, you know, making a touchable app. Is it, you know, and what makes it touchable and readable and on a mobile device sometimes seemed appropriate and other times counterintuitive. So larger fonts so I can see it, larger buttons so I can not have to worry about fat fingering it, having things separated apart from each other. So like, you know, making sure all your UI elements were maybe 40, 44 pixels, you know, high and wide, making sure there was like 20 or so pixels in between. Things like that actually make a difference. Now, sometimes people go, no, it's a little tiny space on this little screen. I need to make everything tiny or it won't fit. You've missed the point. You need to learn how to waste space. It's better to have more screens that are simpler with big, easy-to-use buttons and big fonts that I can read than to try to cram it all in there. You know, it's a journey. People took their bad habits from 90s development and took them right to like the Pocket PC, stuff we did on the Palm Pilot, stuff like that, and kind of went along. It's a journey. Okay, here's a plug for a book I wrote a long time ago. There's a cheat sheet. Back when Windows 8 came along and I saw a whole bunch of problems, and I see escalations from different customers, and I kind of saw some patterns of people going, I really want to get to touch first. I want to use some of these tablets you guys have, but I can't make that giant leap. I can't rewrite, you know, for WinRT, you know. And so an in-between step that you can do for a lot of these desktop apps to kind of almost, I don't want to call it an in-place upgrade, but a lot of these Win32 desktop apps, if you're going to a Win32 tablet, for instance, you know, a Surface, there is a way to do that. And I wrote a small book because I kept seeing this so many times with so many customers, and I was like, well, here's a quick way to do it. And it was basically showing you how you could modify existing UIs on those apps from the 90s Still having all the underlying code, base code, but changing the UI showed you how to get rid of the borders and stuff and make it look like a modern app, full screen, touchable, and in fact, you could almost not tell the difference, even though it's just Win32 underneath, It seemed kind of crazy, but, here we are with Windows 10, and we're back to giving the desktop the love it deserves, because our customers love the desktop. And so anyway, it's a kind of a quick and dirty way to get a whole bunch of apps migrated, not to WinRT, but to get them migrated in the way they're used from old to at least touchable for a tablet. So authentication, usually from all those old apps, was the database authentication. That's all it was. Does anybody know what Scott Tiger means? Or SA and no password? Okay, excellent. So Scott Tiger was the default username and password for Oracle, and obviously SQL Server. We had lots of databases that just had SA and no password. Anyway, over and over again, you'd see that as the auth. Obviously today, you need to switch to modern ways of doing auth, claims-based authentication, using OAuth, where you get tokens, and based on real directories, like, I don't know, maybe Azure Active Directory, something crazy like that. Anyway, you need to decouple database authentication from that. So I've been not giving the web any love, but I need to do that a little bit. Something else happened in the 90s that was really big, and it was the internet, and it was the web, and the commercialization of the web, and that just took off. And people built what you might call a Web 1.0 websites. IT grabbed onto this and loved it for just common sense reasons, like ease of deployment, or it's good enough. And before you knew it, every intranet on the planet, it was web apps. In fact, you can make a case, and when we talk about apps and the rise and fall of apps, or the fall and rise of apps, most of the Windows apps were built in the 90s, but when the web came, that's when you started to see a decline of apps in general, of all types. And the web just started winning, and it wasn't even close, actually. And the intranet stuff just made common sense. It was just an easy way to get new stuff out to people. You could reach everyone, any browser, all that stuff-ish. And apps would not make a resurgence until over a decade later, really on the backs of the iPhone, actually. Even though Windows Mobile had I think we had 20,000 apps before the iPhone launched. I always hate when I see these people doing speeches and say, yes, I remember when the first app was built, when the iPhone 3GS was launched, stuff like that. There was another thing at work here too. There was a browser war, and there was standards wars, or lack of standards wars. And so the reason I say that we had this dumbed down thing, kind of HTML 3.2 and JavaScript 1.3, was because even though there was newer standards, they didn't get adopted, because IE and Netscape were battling it out and building their own standards and things like that. And so in the end, you got the lowest common denominator from everybody instead of the best. And so these are all still out here, just like all the Win32 apps. They are not ready for mobile at all, and there's absolutely ways to make them. And all the modern browsers today are supporting HTML5, CSS3, ECMAScript 5, the newest JavaScript. You should take advantage of that. Some other features of these old websites, and you'll probably still recognize all these today, is just the way they worked, in the back-end system. We had this mega trend of, hey, let's do everything server-side and not have the client have to do anything. And so you didn't see as much JavaScript doing a lot of heavy lifting. And so you had all these round-trip websites and everything. When we got into the mobile world, which is also part of the wireless world with slower, wireless data networks, this didn't work so well, and it just didn't work great on mobile devices. So while a lot of people have made the move a long time ago, and they're doing stuff like single-page apps, and they're using Ajax to refresh and update their DOMs and stuff like that, remember all those REST APIs you're going to build? That's what you're going to call. That's the big change to do there. So this is kind of a controversial slide, I suppose-ish. There's a lot of people, including Microsoft, that are in the business of selling remote desktop technology. For most apps, it's a quick fix. I need to get from here to here really quickly. I wouldn't consider it the best solution. I think for some apps, like if I need to run Visual Studio remotely on a tablet, it's probably going to use remote desktop or deliver it from the cloud. But for lots of other things, you see lots of companies, that was just a quick fix. Hey, we're mobilized. We used Citrix, and now we can do it. And you had people pinching and zooming and scrolling around on their little screen, and it's ridiculous. It represents probably the worst user experience possible. But it was everywhere because it was easy, right? So there will be some edge cases where if you want to remotely run Visual Studio on your tablet, yep, you're probably going to have to stick with that. But for a lot of other things, think of this as an interim step before you rewrite and target mobile. People familiar with responsive web design, CSS, media queries, all that kind of stuff? Yep, do that. Migrate all those big, heavy apps that were built for the desktop and use responsive web design so they target the mobile web. And you have progressive enhancement and all that good stuff. Mobile device, tablet, PC, Surface Hub, things like that. It just works. Use it. All right. So I've belabored the migration stuff here for a whole 30 minutes. Wow. So let's just talk about stuff today. I'm going to spend a little time talking about best practices in enterprise mobile apps, not just normal consumer mobile apps, because there's a lot of things that consumer app developers can learn. I mentioned earlier about just, obviously, we don't have ubiquitous wireless. And it's intermittent, and it's often slow, even though you might be paying for 4G or something like that. All the folks who built, when you're building stuff where you think you're going to get the data you need on demand from the cloud or from the wherever, that's going to lead to a bad user experience because you might reach out and you can't get it. A person might push a button and nothing happens. So you have to follow a sync pattern. This is why mobile databases and the whole sync and offline is so critical in mobile, tablets, whatever. Anything that's going to be on a wireless data network. You need to pre-fetch that data. There's sync technologies, kind of like I mentioned, we've built in mobile services, but you can follow patterns. Even if you have web APIs everywhere with REST-JSON, follow a pattern of pre-fetching the data you need in advance, caching it offline in like SQLite or in some little files, if it's not that much. Do that, make those changes locally. We've got great APIs in Windows to let you know if the network's there or not, if you can connect. And then you send it back when you have data again. So that's a great user pattern to follow to keep that great user experience. This is an interesting one, and this is really kind of a real enterprise mobile thing. A whole lot of technologies in the enterprise mobility management space, like app wrapping, like folks like Mokana and other people like that, and different VPN vendors, really have come out because lots of consumer apps that didn't care about security or did follow practices that don't really fly in the enterprise, but people wanted to use them in the enterprise. Obviously, with this BYOD thing going on and bringing your own app. And so we had these apps that were just kind of wide open, and maybe they'd make web service calls in clear text and auth that way and sending stuff, and they just didn't think about it or care about it because they were building for consumers. Apps today, I think it's more important to put the onus on developers to do the right thing. When you build an app, don't assume anything. Don't assume that there's a PIN or a login already on that device, or that it's already encrypted, or that you've got VPN tunnels. When you build an app, you need to own it. Own the security yourself. Now, I talk to some people, and they say, oh, that's too much to ask of developers. You're making it too hard. Well, then I don't know. If you want to be an enterprise mobile developer, you need to own all this. You think about people leaving phones behind in the taxi or losing it, and maybe they're okay because there's a PIN, but a lot of times you're already logged into the device when maybe you lose control of it. And once you're already logged in, all bets are off. Most times there's so many minutes before the device will lock up again. So once you're in, the encryption's not helping you, nothing's helping you anymore. So the idea of the app itself being the last bastion of security, the fortress, I've already gotten in. So the app can prompt for credentials that are going to get to those back-end systems. The app can actually, we make it easy. I've done all these blog posts for years, back when we didn't even have encryption, like in Phone 7 and 7.5, of how to encrypt your own data at rest. And make sure you're doing something easy like using SSL and prompting, stuff like that. This way, the apps can take care of themselves and be self-reliant, even if all bets are off and your device has been compromised. Does everybody know what a web view is? Like a web control? Anybody been to some sessions about Cordova? PhoneGap, that kind of stuff? Okay, so a lot of analysts, I have friends in all kinds of analyst communities, and when they talk about where the trends, the mega trends in mobile development are, They talk about how HTML5 is being really successful, but it's not successful in the browser on phones. It's successful in web views. So if you're building a native app and you drag a browser control onto it, whichever platform you're using, and then you use that, and basically the takeaway here, there's the notion of these hybrid apps. I need to reach as many platforms as possible, and so if I can reuse my HTML5 and CSS and JavaScript skills and not have to write using different programming languages for different platforms, then I'll get to market faster, right? There was a problem, though, a few years ago. You might remember a version of Netscape on the iPhone, and the performance was dismal. And Mark Zuckerberg came out and said, wow, we were so wrong about HTML5, or we were too soon. It just didn't work out. They were trying to do what we would all want to do. Facebook wanted to be able to reach more platforms more quickly. But the performance just wasn't there. The reason is these web view controls did not have the same capabilities as the full browser. Takeaway now is, as of last year, all of the browser, these web view controls where you can build offline apps using the widely available HTML skills that you can find in folks everywhere, they all have the JIT compiled JavaScript now. They all do hardware accelerated rendering, all the stuff you need. So now is a really good time to maybe, if you haven't already, reconsider going back to taking a look at the being hybrid apps, building, using web technologies. On the other side of cross-platform, because this is a thing, obviously, if you're in business, you need to reach everybody, right? So in the native side, is people familiar with Xamarin, tools like that? Our good buddy, Miguel de Casa? So Xamarin, if you're a C# developer and you want to, or if your company has a bunch of .NET developers and you want to leverage those existing skills, Xamarin's a great way to do it. We have a great relationship with them. You see lots of hooks and tie-ins with Visual Studio into Xamarin, so you can use Visual C# to target iOS and Android. There's other platforms out there like AppCelerator Titanium that does stuff. Actually, you'll do JavaScript and it compiles to native. But definitely good things to take a look at, as opposed to, doing Objective-C here and Java here and C# there, right? It just takes too much time. So when we talk about IoT, it's instrumented hardware, and we're getting value from knowing about the state of that hardware, and we're making decisions based on data, and we have better outcomes. Please, please do that with your software. We do that at Microsoft, but lots of software people write. They just write it and get it out there. You should instrument your software. It all starts with maybe little simple things like I'm logging the errors that are thrown in this software, and I'm going to find a way to get that back to HQ, back to my QA team. But go beyond that. Instrument every part of the app. Find out what parts of the app the users are using. Find out how fast it takes to use different parts of the app. Have the app have feedback for the user to give feedback on how well or how not so well this app is doing. Put all that stuff so that the app is sending this metadata telemetry of how well it's doing in addition to what the app's for, and get that back and run it through the same analytics systems that you would when you think of IoT stuff. It's absolutely valuable, and it'll increase your adoption and the, how much happiness your users will have, all your employees using your app. So this is probably one of the biggest things in mobile right here, is just the idea of contextual experiences. Or my friend Maribel Lopez, she talks about right-time experiences. Other analysts call it different things. But this is where all these things come together and what makes mobile devices and mobile apps so special. And it's because you're using sensors and time and preferences and things, and you're pulling them all together at one time. And things like Cortana on your Windows Phone, knowing your route to work and letting you know that there's a traffic problem or how long it's going to take you to get home, or people building apps for airlines and knowing that, an hour before I get on the plane, I'm going to deliver this information to you. And 15 minutes before you board the plane, I'm going to give you this different information to you. And based on where you are, I'm going to give you other information. This is where mobile comes to life, and this is why mobile is such a big deal. That's why it's taken over the world. It's so personal, and there's the richness and experience you can get by taking advantage of all this is just can't be understated. There are big, awesome books out there written just on this topic. Some folks from Forrester wrote one like a year and a half ago. I'll get it to you later. It's must read, absolutely. It's all about those mobile moments, right time experiences. It's really key. So when you want to bridge the physical and digital world, is anybody familiar with beacons? Bluetooth Low Energy beacons? It's kind of the first deal. It's hot in retail. It's not hot yet. Maybe it'll be hot this next year. But anyway, beacons, besides creating the whole Minority Report experience when you're walking in front of a store and it knows who you do a lookup and it says, oh yeah, come in and buy these jeans here at Old Navy, and I know you love these kind of jeans and I'm going to give them to you for 20% off if you walk in right now. That whole thing is real, and you can use the skills you have. Beacons, it's not a security problem. They don't pair with you in advance, but they just send a little GUID out. And then you have a lookup system, and just like database systems you built before, the lookup says, yeah, this GUID belongs in front of this counter with jeans on it, and then you have preferences, I have an app, and it knows that you like these kind of jeans, blah, blah, blah. Pull it all together. It can also be used for wayfinding, like if you're in an airport or in tunnels, because GPS doesn't work inside. Putting beacons all over the place, like in a convention center like this, having beacons to help guide you to places. Did you ever see anybody years ago, we did a cool video, was it Office 2019, something like that, and it was really cool. It showed people going through the airport and their phone pointing arrows on the floor and showing them how to get there. Stuff like that. It's really cool. It's really how you can merge the physical and digital world to really help users. As I mentioned before, UX isn't UI. It also means all this other stuff. And so when I hear people talk about best practices on mobile, I have spent lots of time geeky things like this. If there's 5 different ways to do a loop, let's find the one that does it the fastest. Especially in my Windows Mobile days when we didn't have a lot of RAM and stuff like that, and storage and things like that. All this stuff really mattered. If it matters to you, if you take care of performance up front instead of trying to bolt it on in the end, it's all good for the user. They're not running out of memory. Things are faster. You're not assuming the connectivity's there because guess what? It probably won't be. And so you're following lots of good patterns. Absolutely make performance from day one a part of doing stuff. Here's just kind of big overall topic. So we live in this BYOD world. Employees are bringing their own devices. And what I'm talking about here is if everybody at the company doesn't get to share in the benefits of having apps and the data delivered via those apps to empower those employees to transform your company, then it's kind of what's the point? Because I'll see companies do little pilots, or maybe they'll do it for one segment of users, or maybe just executives, or they say, it's just too hard. Back to the mobile platform thing, the cross-platform thing, right? Because BYOD by default means it's a free-for-all, right? People are bringing whatever they want. Now, you may have a matrix of devices that you allow and you support. Go all in or don't do it halfway. This is really a call to go back to thinking about what I said earlier on cross-platform stuff. If you really want to empower everybody and democratize mobility across your company, HTML5 is going to be by far your best answer. And if you want to have that native offline scenario, think about Cordova. We've totally baked this Cordova hybrid platform into Visual Studio. That would be my number one go-to by far. Even without the Cordova stuff. HTML5, a lot of people don't understand all the things it can do. There's things called app cache that lets it be offline. There's things like IndexedDB that lets it have a local database. You can make AJAX calls to those REST services and take that data offline. There's web sockets that let you do sockets. There's ways to do threading now. There's web workers. So really explore what's in there in HTML5, because in the end, you need to help everybody. And in BYOD world, it's just really, really hard to target each individual, especially with Android. I forgot what chart I saw recently. I'm probably going to be way wrong. It was like showing, I don't know, maybe 17,000 different fragmented variations of Android that you could have on a phone. It might be 100 times that. I don't know. It was crazy. The web's the only thing you can count on. So think about either HTML5 in the browser or use Cordova. I kind of talked about this morning, if you were in my IoT session, lots of people use dashboards to look at telemetry, and that's great. It's good to have those around. Power BI is a great example of a great dashboard to see telemetry. But another great thing is to take those insights and make them, put them into action. And that's kind of where things like Azure App Services come in. When you have that notification that your escalator is going to fail in a few days because machine learning told you based on the telemetry coming from your instrumented escalator through Event Hub and through machine learning, the great thing is have machine learning not just say, show it on a screen and hope someone notices it. It needs to call notification hubs and do push notification to the repair person with their tablet, which is they're going to sync the data with the data that's in the cloud with SQLite and tells them where to go, what to bring, and what tools they need, and then they're going to close the loop, right? So you didn't just get some information and you didn't just have an aha moment, you made value for your company by doing the whole thing. So enterprise mobility has been a weird thing. People have been talking about this for 15 years. People have been talking at a good game. But the research shows that companies have hardly built any apps at all, and there has been very little movement. And so you always wonder, what's the holdup? It's very possible that IoT is going to help breathe new life into mobile in the enterprise and give companies a reason to really go after it. All right, so the last section here, I just want to talk about mobilizing your infrastructure. Most infrastructures and companies are wholly unprepared for mobility in every way possible. And I'm not just talking about things like EMM stuff. I mean, everywhere. And I'll only touch on a few things here. We might even make it. You never know here. When does this thing end? 4:10? All right. This is just a common thing. A lot of you know. But if you put this in your head and just kind of have this be your baseline of communication, the mobile internet uses REST and JSON. That turned out last decade, that became a grassroots thing, and it just totally, beat down SOAP and XML and all the different things. gzip, deflate, all these open ways. That's how you're going to compress it, This is what everything. So when you think about the stuff you're going to build, this is what you need to do. Because guess what? This will work with any device or any browser. It's REST and it's just JSON, JavaScript, object notation. If a browser without a special SDK can call one of your REST services that you're using to get data for a business app, a browser can do it without an SDK. Your iPhone can do it. Your Windows Phone can do it. Your Android can do it. This is part of helping get to that cross-platform deal to empower your employees. So do it this way. Another thing to do is the idea of wrapping your back-end systems. Now, I remember people talking about this in the SOA age around REST, about SOAP and XML, which didn't happen. But now that REST has become so pervasive, some companies don't have the budgets to, when you say, I need you to just move to the cloud and get the scalability. These are the things you want to start with. But there's old systems out there, and guess what? They all speak different languages, wire protocols. They're not designed for mobile. They can't talk to devices. But you can absolutely help a company by wrapping all those back-end systems, all those servers, those ERP, CRM, whatever they are, proprietary things, logistics systems, wrap them, put those, if it's an on-prem thing, put those Windows servers with the web API, ASP.NET web API wrapped around them, and translate, use some of our connectors we have. We got connectors on-prem. We obviously have connectors now with our Logic apps in Azure to translate that and turn it into REST and JSON. And so that any device that any employees can now take advantage of those systems that were previously not designed for mobile. If you want to accelerate integration with server resources with your mobile devices, look at some mobile middleware solutions. I don't know if anybody knows what these acronyms are. MEEP was a real popular term probably for, maybe the last 10 years, not too recently. It was a Gartner thing. You know how Gartner has all their magic quadrants. So MEEP was a magic quadrant. It was called Mobile Enterprise Application Platform. Microsoft didn't offer one of these. We could cobble it together with some different products. I used to do that a lot. But there were companies that did that. But basically the takeaway is something to accelerate your mobile devices. In fact, when I think about mobility, let me just kind of say one sentence that CIOs really want. They want to get their business critical data from any back-end system out to any device to empower their employees. That's it. That's what they want to do. Figure that out. So there's 1,000 ways to skin that cat. MEEP was an on-premise way of doing that, connectors to back-end systems, staging tables to get that data. I'm going to aggregate CRM and ERP, and then I'm going to have REST and JSON out to devices, or I'm going to use some kind of sync. MBAS stands for Mobile Backend as a Service. You can think of our Azure mobile services as MBAS. Again, it tries to accelerate some things that are typically hard, like we make it easy to do authentication against Azure AD or Facebook or Google or whatever. We make it easy to sync data. We make it easy to do a lot of things that would normally take you a lot of time to do. And we provide SDKs across every platform. So we've got a great solution to really help speed up that integration. Some of the cool things mobile middleware does is it aggregates backend data. So kind of what I talked about, instead of my mobile devices calling 15 different backend systems that a company has, instead you're going to almost like have this middleware. Think of it as a server facade. It's got connectors to all these systems. It's pulling them into one unit, one system, and then you're just connecting to that. And it aggregates them intelligently to what makes sense for the mobile users. Likewise, on the flip side, mobile users out in the field. I cannot tell you, I can't believe it's 2015. I still go and see customers that still have people in the field out there with their pad and paper, and a pencil, and they're filling out forms, It's like it's 1975, but it still happens, and it's everywhere, so don't feel bad if it's one of you. And guess what else they do? I see this all the time. They're out in the field, they're filling out stuff in paper, the internet's all around them, but they don't see it. And then guess what? At the end of the day, they get in their pickup truck and they drive back to, not home, the office. And they go into the office to their desk, and they got their paper here, and then their computer, maybe with their SAP terminal there, and they transcribe the data into SAP or something like that. I call that human ETL. You database people would know what that means. Extract, transform, and load. Anyway, stop it. The mobile middleware can take care of the duplication. I can enter in lots of common data into one form on my mobile device and send it. And then guess what? That same data, there might be overlap, and that mobile middleware can send a lot of the same data to back-end different systems. So stop doing human ETL. Web scale, that's another big thing with Gartner. It's not good enough to have workgroup scale or corporate scale. You need to have web scale. Like, you need to build Facebook's an extreme example. That's serious scalability. How can you bring web scale to your systems? Obviously, if you use the cloud like Azure, you're going to get web scale. It can scale ridiculously, hyperscale. It's awesome. But for back-end systems like the ones I'm talking about that they can't budge and you're going to wrap with APIs, you can, beyond that, you can put things in front of it to give that back-end server that was designed for work groups and give it the capability to handle huge amounts of mobile devices. We used to do it, we would do it with SQL Server and SSIS. SSIS would be connected to back-end, put stuff in staging tables, maybe do some sharding. You know what sharding is? Breaking things apart horizontally, shared nothing partitions, replicating it out there. Use queues, because you got to have queues in scalable systems. Use Redis or other caches. There's lots of things you can build. So you're building this REST JSON wrapper around old systems, and then you do this layer of stuff too to give it performance that it didn't have before. So anyway, fun stuff to do in the event that you can't go to the cloud. BYOD has moved people from one-to-one PC computing to anywhere from 3 or 4 or 5 or more to one mobility. I talk to customers all the time, and you kind of already know this, because yourself, you probably have a bunch of devices in your pockets and everything. I remember first noticing this when I would talk to customers, and they go, yeah, I don't know what's going on. Our Exchange CAS servers, that they're really getting beaten up. Oh, it turns out that instead of each employee having one, device talking to Exchange, their laptop, now they've got 5 devices all beating up on those Exchange servers. And they're having to add more Exchange front-end servers. Oh, and our DNS servers are getting beaten up too because people are, the little lookups internally. Oh, our AD, we needed more AD because we're doing more auths, because there's more devices doing that. Oh, I don't have enough access points with Wi-Fi. I need more higher density with my access points. There's a huge laundry list of software and hardware. Back when I talk about companies being wholly unprepared for mobility, and they're just finding out on their own. They just find out by discovering that, wow, this is really kind of sucking. So this is where you can help your customers or help your own company, is by improving that. I mean, even silly things like DHCP leases and changing those. Anyway, it's a thing. Here's one thing you should do, or can do. You may not be doing it. So lots of companies have a guest network, and for guests to come in there, and that sends them out to the internet because we don't want those guests to see all our back-end servers and everything. Just do that for everybody. Build your guest network on steroids and send everybody to the internet. if they're on a Wi-Fi device, for instance, if it's an employee or not. Lots of people have tried really hard, and we've got all kinds of great technologies around Wi-Fi and security to let you get on securely and talk straight to those backend servers. But I think pragmatically, security-wise and keeping it simple, send everybody to the internet. And then if they need to get email or get to some backend systems, make them go out and come back in through the same systems, the same gateways, the same firewalls, all the same things you do to make them get into an intranet. Do it that way instead of taking the risk of people getting right at servers. Speaking of that, look at that. Publishing. So, if you think about publishing web services or websites, remember ISA server and UAG, and we had a bunch of acronyms and stuff like that. And then we baked all that stuff into Windows Server. Or you can just go to the cloud, and we have gateways, and it's just easy there. I have a real pet peeve with Android. So I'll hear people talk about, no, I'm good to go on my Android devices with my employees. I've got encryption. I've got a PIN. We're using VPN, so it's secure, right? And so when you create a VPN tunnel to your network, to your mobile device, unless you're doing something special, the whole network is accessible by your device. So what if you happen to be using a device that had a weird app store where they didn't test the apps and didn't vet the apps, and it was just a big free-for-all where rogue apps could get there and you could download them, and then those apps could just drive a truck through the VPN tunnel you created and attack your servers and your network? Yeah, that would be Android today, still. It's a problem. You have to keep reminding people of that kind of stuff because you can secure all these other things, and then these rogue apps could be the killer. You probably never heard of a femtocell or a microcell or something. If maybe you live somewhere where you don't have good coverage and the mobile operator gives you something you can put in your house and connect to your cable modem or DSL. It's to extend things for homes, but also I see it in companies where they have to work sites in the field and they have bad coverage. You can use these femtocells and these mobile broadband routers to bring networks out to fringe sites, like if I'm doing mining in Western Australia. Or if I'm in this convention center, or if I'm at a casino in Las Vegas, they use femtocells to bring the internet. Because guess what? Back to user experience, customer delight. They want to have their phone working perfectly, even in deep caverns of a casino, right? So do it. It's a good thing if you're in that business. Build a COE around mobility that defines a lot of governance. All the boring, mundane stuff. It's not building apps. But it's things like telecom expense. We all deal with that when we're traveling, especially. How do I deal with that? All this governance stuff. I have some templates of 100-page governance-type documents. And that matrix of supported devices. So there's BYD and choose your own device and COPE and all these other things where they can go through and say, hey, here's the list of devices that we'll really, really support for all this stuff. When you have people working around the world, cloud services is going to be your way to go. Beyond just the obvious things that you like about the cloud, we have just this great technology called Traffic Manager in Azure. So if I build my website, my web services, all that kind of stuff, and I have Traffic Manager turned on, and it's replicated around Azure data centers around the globe. And so when I'm over here, it's going to know that I'm here, and it's going to take me to Australia or Singapore instead of Quincy, Washington. It's probably a good thing. Latency, user experience, it's all good. If you do not have an EMM solution, like an MDM solution, don't be afraid to start with Exchange Server. Because, boy, I was there when we baked all that stuff into Exchange Server back in the old Windows Mobile days. And guess what? It ended up being the biggest, most widely used MDM product ever. It didn't mean to be, but it just kind of did, because we could enforce policies. So if you got Exchange on-premise or you're using Office 365, you've got all these capabilities to enforce policies. It's not everything, but if you don't have anything else and you need to get up and running, you need to lock down some devices and do a lot of the basic stuff, absolutely take advantage of this in Exchange. When you've made that next step and you want to start helping your users, making things easier for users, then get an EMM solution that can provision things that are hard to do. Lots of us, we're all a bunch of geeks, and we know how to configure our Exchange email on our phone. But lots of folks don't know how to do that. So get an EMM solution that can push out provisioning for Wi-Fi, certs, VPN, email to make it easy for them. It's not about locking down the device. It's about helping them. It's about making it easier for the user. Then so now we talk about enforcing policies at a broad deal, like we're using MDM to kind of secure a device, because in the end this is really about security, right? And securing data. You can get more granular. Have you heard of MAM, Mobile Application Management, app wrapping, things like that? Make sure your EMM solution has MAM capabilities, so you don't have that data leakage, from business apps leaking to personal apps, things like that. We saw some great demonstrations at the keynote last night about seeing apps that got the key on it, right? Make sure your EMM solution can help you do that stuff and keep that personal separated from business. To get even more granular, applying policies directly to data itself. So we did the whole device with MDM. We do it at the app level with MAM. And with MEM, or Digital Rights Management, which is something we happen to have, you can do it and apply it right to documents. Kind of like you saw last night, kind of things we've had. We've had something called Azure RMS that's part of our Enterprise Mobility Suite with Intune. We've had this RMS technology baked into Active Directory for a long time. Anybody who might be using it, when you're in Outlook and you send an email and you might say, do not forward, cannot reply all, can't save, that kind of thing. It lets you put policies on that and encrypts it. Because lots of CIOs don't like it when they find out the documents found their way into Dropbox or they're somewhere else, and they're not too thrilled about other people seeing it. So this is how you get more granular. Not a lot of people can do this. I have lots of friends that work in the EMM space. They're at MobileIron, AirWatch, everywhere, you name it. This is a hard thing to do. We've been doing it for a while. Lots of companies are afraid that their mobile phone is the weak link. Start to think of it as your new asset. You've been seeing us, you see Microsoft, you saw in demos last night, you've been seeing us get a lot more serious over the last few years around multi-factor authentication, using your phone, using either getting an SMS, a call, an app, an authenticator. This is a great asset. All of a sudden, this thing that you thought was a weak link for your employees is now going to be one of your best security options. So absolutely have your employees use this and enable multi-factor authentication on all kinds of stuff, your servers, Azure, things like this. We're having too many hack attacks on a weekly basis. You really have to get serious about this, and we make it easy to do that. Remember those rogue apps I talked about from Android that didn't get vetted by Google? So make sure your EMM solution can blacklist those apps when you've found that you have them, or you can turn off the App Store altogether. Conditional access. This is an interesting thing. I kind of talk about motivating BYOD users to enroll. So it's great to talk a good game about all these EMM solutions and how awesome they are for the enterprise, but then there's that whole human nature thing where people are like, oh, it's a hassle. I don't want to enroll in some deal, and then it's like they own my device or whatever. Conditional access to email, cloud services, SharePoint, things like that. Having that will entice your users. It's a give-get. If you want to get these corporate resources, then you're going to have to let me put this, do management on your device, And we do light management. I don't mean draconian hardcore stuff like the old BlackBerry Enterprise Server days. So anyway, absolutely look for solutions that give conditional access to things people want. And with that, we are all done. We made it through the tweets.